This is one of the saddest places I've seen in my entire life, man. Why would someone do something like this? Hurt so many people. Destroyed so much beauty. Destroyed so many buildings, cities, towns, villages, everything, families. Kidnap someone for ransom. I obviously don't need to tell you about how crazy and sad and heartbreaking the situation in Syria after the civil war really is because, I'm sure you know already. But some time ago, I actually got the chance to get inside the country. That experience was one of the most emotional and heartbreaking travel experiences of my entire life. But at the same time, I met so many wonderful, kind, beautiful, incredible people there that inspired me with their belief that, life could get better someday, despite all the terrible things happening around them. This is my daily life in Syria after the civil war. Modern-day Syria is one of the most ancient inhabited regions on Earth, as the oldest human remains found in Syria date back to roughly 700,000 years ago. Due to its incredibly lucrative geographical location, Syria was occupied and ruled by many strong empires of the past, including the Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Phoenicians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and Byzantines. In 637 AD, Muslim armies defeated the Byzantine Empire and took control of Syria. Less than 1,000 years later, Syria fell to the hands of the Ottoman Empire, which ruled the country for 400 years, but finally gained its independence in 1946. Syria gradually became one of the most touristy places in the Middle East due to the country's ancient history, famous historical sites, and great weather. It got so popular, in fact, that it was visited by 8.5 million tourists from around the world in 2010, netting the country over $8 billion in revenue. However, things changed dramatically in early 2011. What started out as peaceful protests eventually turned into a full-blown civil war where the government forces were fighting the rebels called the Free Syrian Army. The battle became a lot more complicated as it progressed. New forces, including various terrorist groups, joined the fight and ravaged the country. In the ensuing conflicts, numerous cities got destroyed, hundreds of towns and villages were abandoned, and millions of people fled their homes and their country, causing one of the largest refugee crises the world had ever seen. As a result, the movement of tourists declined by more than 99%, causing the revenues to diminish and the whole tourism industry to collapse, as hardly any foreigners would visit the country. This is the situation Syria was in when I went there as a foreign tourist. I'm currently in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, and right now I'm walking to a meeting place with my driver who will actually take me to Syria. Then I met my driver, hopped into his truck, and started my long drive towards Syria. We're currently approaching the border with Syria. It's literally just a few kilometers away. Apparently they have some sort of a buffer zone between Lebanon and Syria, which is where we are right now. I'm so close. Wow. My first ride inside the country was really fascinating as it felt completely surreal being there. I mean, it's Syria, An hour later, I finally arrived at the country's ancient capital called Damascus. Damascus is not only a famous UNESCO World Heritage Site, but also the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world that's over 10,000 years old. Due to its geographical position at the crossroads between Africa, Europe, and Asia, the city has been conqueror and conquered, wealthy and destitute, and capital of empires and small states. These days, Damascus still retains a lot of its ancient beauty with large markets spread all throughout the city, prominent churches and mosques, old coffee shops and traditional hotels, museums, palaces, narrow lanes that take you many years back in time. And of course, is inhabited by incredibly nice people.
Habibi, so many memories. Thank you. Shukran. Yeah. Everyone's so nice. Wow.
Not only that, Damascus has a few places I honestly never expected to find there, like this modern shopping mall. What? I'm chilling at a pretty fancy shopping mall here in Syria. They have many shops, actually a lot of customers. And it looks pretty fancy, look at that. They even have palm trees, what? Still hardly believing that I was walking around a shopping mall in Syria, I went back to the old town and entered the city's crown jewel, the Great Mosque of Damascus, which is one of the largest and oldest mosques in the entire world. This mosque is so big and so incredible, it's crazy. There's so much history all around me right now, literally thousands of years old, and I've seen this place so many times on the media and YouTube and Google and everywhere, and now I'm here. The spot where the mosque now stands used to be a temple for the worship of Jupiter, then later became a Christian church in the Byzantine era, and eventually was turned into this great mosque. Legend dating to the 6th century holds that the building contains the head of John the Baptist, and the mosque is also believed by Muslims to be the place where Jesus will return at the end of days. Literally everything looked really beautiful inside the mosque, but my guide Riham thought the decorations were the best part.
As you can see, this mosaic is the only one like this in the entire world because the style is of Byzantine style. However, the decorations are Islamic because they only portray vegetation and houses and castles and not humans or animals as the Islamic traditions state.
Having visited the mosque, Riham and I roamed the wonderful streets of Damascus, exploring as much as we could. We also spent quite a bit of time talking about her life in Damascus during the civil war that started in March of 2011. Riham told me she was only 17 years old when the war broke out and that all of her student years were very different from what she had dreamed of growing up. You see, in 2012, the rebels launched a full-scale military attack on the city. It was the first time that tanks and helicopters had been deployed in central Damascus and left parts of the city as war zones. Riham was in Damascus the whole time. She told me how she would hear gunshots and see smoke in different parts of the city while staying home or attending her classes. She told me that everyone felt so much fear at the time that many people had packed their bags ready to leave their beloved homes if they needed to. However, a few weeks later, the fighting ceased as the Syrian army regained the control of Damascus. As you can imagine, the situation was still unstable for a long time. The outskirts kept being attacked, the city kept being shelled, and bombing attacks were a regular occurrence. Riham told me that lots of her friends had left Damascus with their families and became refugees in other countries, mostly in Turkey, Lebanon, and Western Europe. But she thought she'd find it very difficult to lead her life outside of her homeland, and thus she and her family decided to stay in Syria. Early the next morning, I met up with my new Syrian guide, a wonderful adventurous lady by the name of Safsan. Together we hopped into a car with our own driver and went on a road trip.
He is our friend and our driver.
Okay, nice.
He is very nice fellow.
Nice. Me, Jacob.
Jacob. His name is Jacob.
Some minutes later, when we left the city center and were passing by the outskirts, I finally understood what Riham had told me about the day before. Hundreds of buildings were completely destroyed and abandoned everywhere I looked. Incredible, my driver got taken away. Man, just a regular day in the life of Jacob. Safsan, you okay?
Yes, I am okay.
Yes.
I am okay since you are feeling good in Syria.
Yeah.
We are okay.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay,
We also have a passenger. As crazy as the situation actually was, I did all I could to focus on the task at hand and kept driving forward across one of the most dangerous roads in Syria. The further I drove, the more clear it became how much the war had actually affected that area. We passed through lots of towns and villages that were totally destroyed, and there were no living souls there. Look at this town, it looks so abandoned, no? However, not every town's destiny was the same. There actually were a few that still had people living in them. Just stopped at some sort of a random town that we were passing through. I'm here next to the road. There's like a shop there, a couple of kids around me, a couple of taxis, and man, it looks sort of abandoned, you know, half destroyed as well. On the one hand, it's incredibly sad to be here for, you know, very obvious reasons, but at the same time, when you see how friendly the people are and how positive a lot of them are and how welcoming, it just warms your heart.
Shukran.
Yay! How's your sandwich?
Yes. Nice sandwich.
It looks bigger than you. Later that night, we finally reached our destination of the day, the city that had been ravaged by war the most, Aleppo. Just came to the eastern side of Aleppo, which is still basically an active war zone, and most of the buildings here seem to be completely destroyed by bombs and stuff. Look at that, for example. Such a crazy place. Most of Aleppo had unfortunately been destroyed by war, which is why it felt really strange to see quite a bit of action there in the city center late at night. Saf said this is such a beautiful place, no? What do you think?
Yes, yes.
Crazy.
Impressive place. Every time I come here, I feel so much proud of that castle.
Yes. We spent another hour walking around the city and interacting with the really friendly local people. Eventually, we got back to our hotel, where sleep certainly didn't come easy. It is just after 6 a.m. right now. I couldn't sleep since 3 because of all the things that happened yesterday. So I figured I'll just go to the balcony and enjoy the view. That is the citadel right there. Look at all these houses. Half of them are abandoned. You see? There's people living on the roof here, I guess. Man, it's crazy to think how much stuff the city has actually seen in the very, very, very recent past. And now I'm here in this, hotel, meeting all these beautiful, beautiful people. They have so much love in their hearts, so much warmth, all the pain and all the suffering caused by the war. And then you see these people's faces and their smiles and their belief that, things could be better. When the sun rose, I finally left my hotel, and this was the first thing I saw. Just walking here on a street in Aleppo towards the citadel, and literally the whole district all around me is basically destroyed, as you can see. Man, it's so unfortunate seeing things like this. Oh my God. Look at this lane, for example. Man, war is so dumb, guns are so dumb, tanks and everything. It's just incredible. Look at this house, for example. People used to live here. They even have the satellite TV and everything. Oh no. During the day, I kept asking Safsan loads of things about what had happened in Aleppo because I just couldn't believe what I saw. This is what I learned. Similar to Damascus, Aleppo is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, dating back to 10,000 years before Christ. Known for being a very tolerant city for people of all ethnicities and religions, Aleppo gradually became the greatest center of trade between Europe and lands farther east. During the Syrian civil war, however, everything changed. You see, after the unsuccessful assault of Damascus, the fighters launched an all-out offensive on Aleppo in mid-2012. Reportedly, some of the civil war's most devastating bombing and fiercest fighting took place in Aleppo, often in residential areas. For the remaining months of 2012, house-to-house fighting between armed opposition and government forces continued, and as of spring of 2013, the Syrian army has entrenched itself in the western part of Aleppo and the armed opposition in the eastern part with a no-man's land between them. The stalemate lasted for 4 very long years and ended in July of 2016 when Syrian government troops closed the last supply line of the armed opposition into Aleppo with the support of Russian airstrikes and pushed the rebels out of the city. Even though relative peace came back to the residents of Aleppo, the fighting caused severe destruction to the city. An estimated 33,000 buildings have been either damaged or destroyed. This is how the city looks these days. We spent many hours walking around Aleppo and eventually came inside one of the many destroyed buildings in the area and ran into a painter by the name of Yasser, who's rebuilding the rooms inside the building one by one. We just made friend with Abu Yasser here, who is a painter and is actually repainting one of the rooms inside the abandoned building. Shukran for what you're doing. Thank you. Man, it's so incredible to see that even in the most dire of circumstances you can ever imagine, people still don't lose hope. This guy comes to work every day to this completely destroyed building, paints new rooms, builds tables and chairs and tries to make them better, one room at a time. Incredible. The people here are so strong-willed. Then we proceeded to the city center where we stumbled upon some really friendly school kids on their annual school trip.
Welcome to Syria! Welcome to Syria!
Love you all!
Love you all!
And then we went inside the citadel of Aleppo, which is one of the oldest castles in the world. It's around 5,000 years old. The citadel was badly damaged during the Battle of Aleppo in 2012 when the rebels fought against the government forces to gain control over the citadel. The Syrian army retained the control of the citadel and used it as an active military base, which further damaged the castle. However, when the situation became a little bit more stable, they began repairing the citadel and reopened it to the public in 2017. Not everything's been repaired yet, but the castle is certainly an incredible sight to visit, one that takes you thousands of years back in time, or in my case, to the 21st century. Listen to those sounds in the distance. It's a machine gun sound. Dude, I can also see some smoke. You see there? Man, they're literally a few kilometers away from the citadel. What? Look at that, you see the smoke and stuff. After this crazy incident, Safsan told me we should leave the city immediately. And so we hopped back into our car and rode hundreds of kilometers away from Aleppo, stopping for short breaks whenever we had the chance. Oh, look at that. Just came on top of the track. It's really big, super rusty as well. Wow. That's the road we're taking right here. And this is just a random, regular attraction. The next day, we found ourselves in the second most destroyed city in Syria, the city of Homs. Similar to the other majorly affected areas, Homs saw the battles between the government and the rebels, as well as multiple terrorist groups who were fighting for control over the city. Relative stability came back to Homs in 2014 when a ceasefire agreement was reached, but the damage had been done. Over 10,000 buildings had been badly damaged or destroyed, with thousands of civilians having to flee their homes. Even though things are certainly not improving fast, what I found really interesting about Homs was that I encountered quite a few people who were doing their best preserving and improving their city amidst all the chaos around them. The first of those people was this really strong woman by the name of Iman Ahmad, who spent the last few years of her life managing the reconstruction of the largest mosque in Homs that was completely destroyed during the war. So apparently, all the buildings around it are still completely demolished because they were bombing the whole area and blowing everything up and burning buildings down. And, everything got affected, but they're slowly rebuilding, buildings bit by bit. And this is apparently the first one in the area. I really hope that, in a few years, maybe a few dozen years, the whole area around it will once again be rebuilt. Then I made friends with two awesome cousins called Amir and Ibrahim, who are the only people who had not closed their carpet shop in this big marketplace building in central Homs.
Welcome to Syria.
Yes.
Welcome to Syria.
Welcome to Syria. Thank you so much. Wow.
Thank you.
It's amazing. Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, my guide Safsan took me to this fascinating church called Omzenar. Omzenar is one of the oldest churches in the world, built in 95 AD, but it was also destroyed during the war. However, the local Christian community raised funds for the reconstruction of their holy place and rebuilt it all themselves in just a few years. Very evidently, there still is a lot of work that needs to be done in the city of Homs, but I was very happy to meet and interact with people who don't sit around waiting for someone else to do it for them, but rather find ways, as hard as it might be sometimes, to make a change on their own. These people are the real heroes.
It's so incredible how strong the Syrian people are. I mean, this city is completely destroyed, basically. And they're still smiling, running their businesses, talking to me, posing for me and stuff. Imagine. So sad and so inspiring at the same time, you know what I mean?
When we hopped into the car for our next adventure, Safsan told me we'll go see a few places that weren't as affected by the war as Aleppo and Homs were. And so I found myself in one of the most important, well-preserved medieval castles in the world, called Crac de Chevalier.
You know, in countries like Syria and all around the Middle East, oftentimes you're surrounded by a lot of noise and traffic and, you know, people and stuff, and it's cool. But at the same time, finding a place like this that's so completely peaceful is something incredible. There's not a single other person here with us. The views all around are incredibly beautiful. Honestly, didn't expect to see this in Syria. Wow. Somehow didn't think a place like this could survive what happened, you know? But it did. And I'm so happy.
Having explored the castle, we decided to visit the famous coast of Syria and made our way to the beautiful coastal town of Tartus, which felt incredibly different from the rest of the country as there were never any battles taking place in the city.
There's absolutely no abandoned and destroyed buildings. There's quite a few young people all around the area, hugging, holding hands. There's people fishing, riding bicycles. It's such a different city from, you know, all the Syria that I've seen so far. It's incredible.
The next morning we took a small boat together with dozens of friendly locals and eventually landed on the only inhabited island in Syria, called Arwat. Even though the island itself was never touched by war, it's inhabited by only a few thousand people these days, who are mostly fishermen, shipbuilders, or sailors. However, it was first inhabited by the Phoenicians a few thousand years ago, and thus it really does take you many years back in time and somehow lets you forget the ravages of war you had just witnessed, at least for a bit.
Local kids just joined us. You, Ahmed? Mohammed, oh. Original name. Speak English? Little English, yeah? Okay, thank you, bye. Bye, shukran.
Having left the beautiful coast of Syria, we once again went back into the mountains to a place that made me so emotional it will never leave my mind. The Orthodox Christian mountain town of Maaloula. Even though only 2,000 people live in Maaloula, it's a very well-known place in Syria because of its famous monasteries, especially the convent of Saint Thecla, which holds the remains of Thecla, who was a pupil of Paul the Apostle. Another reason this convent is so famous is because during the war, the Al-Nusra Front took 12 Orthodox nuns as hostages. The nuns were held hostage for over 3 months until finally released back to their convent, which was also gravely affected by war. When we left the convent, we hiked up this beautiful gorge and entered a building that used to be a fancy 4-star hotel, but was very severely affected during the war.
This is the hotel. It used to be really, really big. Everything is destroyed. They still have the rubble in here. That must have been the main entrance right there. These are the stairs. Wow. There's water dripping down everywhere. Look at the corridor. There's probably a few dozen rooms on both sides in here. Now it's completely destroyed. This is the roof. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This is one of the saddest places I've seen in my entire life, man. Why would someone do something like this? Hurt so many people. Destroyed so much beauty. Destroyed so many buildings, cities, towns, villages, everything, families. Kidnap someone for ransom. I really hope stuff like this won't happen ever again in the future. I really hope people will see that love is all we need, not hate, not division. We're all the same. We're all beautiful. We're all kind. We're all amazing in our own right, even if we believe in different gods or have different skin colors, genders, beliefs, whatever. We're all the same. Let's be friendly to one another. Let's respect one another. Let's love one another. Let's spread happiness and love and understanding, not hate, ever, to prevent something like this from happening again. Please.
Eventually, the sun set and Safsan and I just stood on this roof, hardly even talking, as I was lost in my thoughts about everything I had seen and experienced during my time in Syria. The obvious thing is the never-ending destruction. You see it everywhere, in tiny villages, beautiful towns, and large cities. Being constantly surrounded by so many destroyed buildings, I felt very overwhelmed and emotional. I just couldn't understand why there's still so much fighting going on in the world. At the same time, the local people completely fascinated me. Despite all the terrible things happening around them, they seemed to have so much positivity, perseverance, and faith that it just blew me away. I ran into dozens of wonderful people, from merchants, constructors, and performers to cooks, drivers, and students. Everyone was really friendly. People greeted me, posed for me, showed me their work, and laughed with me as if I was a long-lost cousin of theirs. Thank you to the people of Syria for your positivity, friendliness, strength, and your belief that the future can be brighter. I wish I could be half as strong as you are in these circumstances, and I pray that life will come back to normal as soon as possible. Thank you for caring about the Syrian people enough to watch the video until the very end. Those people, the beautiful, wonderful Syrian people, they did not deserve this to happen. And because of that, I really do think that you and I need to do all we can to help them as much as possible. And so recently I was doing a lot of research about what nonprofit organizations help the Syrian refugees the most, and I stumbled upon this organization called the International Rescue Committee that helped displaced families, help them get visas to other places, help them get shelter and food and education, and they just do a wonderful job helping the millions of people that unfortunately had to flee their country. And so they don't know that I'm doing this. I never talked to them. They never asked me to do this, but I'm gonna leave the donation links in the description box of this video if you want to actually donate to that organization. And my team and I also wanted to do our part, so we just launched t-shirts that are called People Are Kind that we're selling on my personal store, once again in the description box down below. And all the profits that we sell from these limited edition shirts will also be donated to that organization. Thank you so much for caring about the Syrian people, and I really do think that if you went there yourself, you would also see how beautiful and kind and friendly and nice they really are, and I really do think that right now they really do need our help. Thank you so much. See you next time.